She's just a good girl from school. That's all this ever was. She's leaving anyway. Maggie heard Jack and his best friend talking. It was the night before prom. She left town that day. Without a word, no goodbyes. Just a man who never stopped wondering why. But 40 years later, they meet again. And Jack hadn't forgotten. Because some stories don't stay buried. They wait for the right moment to be opened. If you believe it's never too late for the truth, or for love, stay with us. They say there's a moment when the past comes knocking, not with a loud crash or a storm, but with a quiet tap, a gentle pull at the edge of memory. For Maggie Sullivan, that moment came on a Wednesday morning, when her phone rang and a voice from a town she hadn't visited in over 4 decades asked for her help. She was in her little kitchen in Hartford, sunlight warming the counter where her coffee steamed gently. Retired life had settled around her like a soft blanket, quiet, predictable, and a little too lonely. Maggie, 62, a community nurse turned volunteer, had long believed her most meaningful work was behind her. That was until she heard the name, Cedar Hollow. Miss Sullivan, this is Karen Anderson from the Cedar Hollow Health Committee. The voice on the line was kind, hopeful. We're building a new community health center here, and your name kept coming up. We'd be honored if you could oversee the coordination. Your work in Hartford's clinics is the kind of leadership we need. Cedar Hollow. The name bloomed in her chest like a flower pressed in an old book, familiar and aching. She hadn't been back since the summer of '78. She told Karen she'd think about it, and she did. She thought about it all day and all night. But it wasn't until the next morning when her old friend Ellen called that the idea rooted itself firmly in her heart. "Maggie," Ellen said, warm and insistent, "this town shaped you. You always said that. Maybe this is how you say thank you." Ellen didn't mention Jack, but Maggie heard his name in the spaces between the words. She saw his face in the corners of her mind, the way he used to smile without showing all his teeth, the sound of his laugh that always seemed to surprise even him. By Friday, Maggie had packed a suitcase. She told herself it was just a few weeks, just a project, just a chance to give back. But part of her, a part she didn't want to examine too closely, knew it was more. The drive to Cedar Hollow took 3 hours, but the years stretched longer. Every mile brought her closer to a version of herself she had buried. Every signpost, every tree-lined stretch of road whispered memories. Summer picnics, the high school bleachers, late-night talks on back porches. When she pulled into town, it was late afternoon. The sky was gold, and the sidewalks glowed like the town had been waiting for her. She parked by the general store, where the bell above the door still chimed like a memory. Maggie stepped out, heels crunching on gravel, and took a deep breath. It smelled like pine, like rain that had passed through hours before. It smelled like home. People recognized her. They smiled, hugged her. The years melted in those smiles. But her eyes kept drifting to the edges, looking for something, someone she wasn't ready to name. The next morning, she arrived at the community hall where the health center was being set up. She carried her clipboard and wore her best in-charge smile. That's when she saw him. He was crouched by a tool bag, wrench in hand, sleeves rolled, grease on his forearm. He looked up when she walked in, and the years fell away between them like autumn leaves. "Maggie?" She hadn't expected to hear her name from his mouth again. "Jack." Her voice came steadier than she felt. For a moment, the room stood still. Jack blinked as if he wasn't sure she was real. He stood slowly, wiping his hands on a rag tucked in his back pocket. I didn't know you were coming today," he said, voice low, eyes searching hers. "I wasn't sure I was either," Maggie replied, eyes flicking to the clipboard in her hands like it held more importance than it did. He nodded, glancing at the ground, then back at her. "You look," he trailed off, then smiled, crooked and soft. "You look like you never left." She offered a polite smile. 40 years'll do that to a place. Not always to people. There was silence again. Not awkward, but dense, like the air had thickened between them. Jack stepped aside, gesturing to the layout plans pinned to a corkboard. "Karen said we're short a few supply racks," he said, easing back into business. "But I found a couple in storage behind the firehouse. Bit rusted, but they'll hold." Maggie nodded. "Good, I'll make a note." She scribbled something, anything, on her clipboard, though she wasn't looking at what she was writing. Jack leaned casually on the edge of a work table, watching her with the same quiet intensity she remembered from high school, like he was reading between every word she didn't say. "Still right with that little left-leaning slant," he said, almost amused. She paused mid-scribble, her lips curved just barely. "Some habits die harder than others." He chuckled. "I still put my wrenches in the wrong drawers if that makes you feel better." "It doesn't." Jack grinned. "Fair enough." There was another beat of silence, this one heavier, more brittle. Maggie straightened her shoulders. "Well, I should get started," she said, shifting the clipboard under her arm. "Lots to do." Jack gave a small nod, stepping aside to let her pass. As she moved by, their arms nearly brushed. She didn't flinch, but she didn't pause either. "Glad you're here, Maggie," he said quietly behind her. She stopped, just for a second, then turned her head slightly, enough to let him see the edge of her profile. "We'll see," she said. And then she was gone, walking deeper into the hall, clipboard clutched tight, leaving behind the scent of lavender and a lifetime of unanswered questions. In the days that followed, they worked together in fits and starts, coordinating deliveries, arranging floor plans, repairing leaks. Conversations were short, focused, but every shared glance, every accidental touch sparked something beneath the surface. And the town noticed. They were the couple everyone remembered from senior year, the ones who were supposed to make it, the ones who didn't. Jack hadn't changed much, still quiet, still grounded, still had that slow, thoughtful way of looking at people like he was trying to memorize their face. And Maggie hadn't realized how much of her old self was still buried in this town. She didn't say it out loud, but part of her had come back not just to give, but to find something she'd lost, something that maybe hadn't been lost at all. Work had a strange way of softening the edges between them. In the weeks that followed their first quiet reunion, Maggie and Jack found themselves side by side more often than not. She was the one with the clipboard and the plan. He was the one with the wrench and the toolbox. Between organizing vaccine kits and fixing faulty pipes, they fell into a rhythm that felt too familiar to be accidental. It started small. Jack would hand her something before she asked for it. Maggie would anticipate what he needed without a word. He'd mutter under his breath while lifting something heavy, and she'd finish his sentence like she always used to. They didn't talk about it. They didn't need to. There were moments, tiny, fleeting ones, when it felt like time had forgotten to pass between them. They were careful, of course. Conversation stayed surface level. They talked about the supply list, the schedule, the new group of volunteers arriving next week. But sometimes, without meaning to, the past would leak in through the cracks. "Did you hear Mrs. Goldstein passed?" Jack asked one afternoon, his voice muffled as he adjusted the water heater pipes under the sink. Maggie, unpacking medical supplies across the room, looked up. "Biology, third period, right?" "Yep, spent half the year with her yelling at me to stop tapping my pencil." "You never did." He grinned. "Some habits die hard." Another day, they were restocking shelves together when Maggie spotted an old map of Cedar Hollow tucked behind a cabinet. "You remember the trail by Westwood Creek?" she asked, unfolding it. Jack leaned over to look. "That's where you twisted your ankle that summer." "I didn't twist it. I tripped on your stupid flashlight cord." He laughed, and then made me carry you 3 miles back. "I was testing your loyalty. You were heavy." She laughed, surprised at herself. And just like that, the years thinned again. One morning, as the early sun filtered through the windows, they found themselves alone, organizing boxes of donations. Jack unwrapped a bundle of bandages from a brown paper package. "Remember how I used to sneak fruit to you during lunch?" Maggie looked up, curious. "Fruit." He smiled. "Banana slices, wrapped in a napkin. You hated the cafeteria food." She blinked. "That was you?" Jack feigned offense. "You thought the fruit fairy was someone else? I thought it was the janitor." He laughed, low and warm. "Guess I should have signed my work." She smiled, and for a second they just stood there, suspended in that space between memory and present. Later that same day, as they were taking a break outside the clinic, Maggie reached into her bag and pulled out a thermos. "Still drink too much coffee?" she asked. Jack accepted it, surprised. "Only when someone reminds me it exists." They sat quietly on the bench, drinking in companionable silence. I was thinking about that time we built the soapbox cart for the science fundraiser, Maggie said eventually. Jack nearly choked. The one that almost killed you? You said it would go slow down the hill. I said it should. Then you added those oversized wheels from your cousin's old bike. Maggie chuckled. I remember you jumping in front of me when I couldn't stop. Bruise my ribs catching you, he said, mock bitterness in his voice. She looked at him. You didn't even yell at me, you just kept apologizing like it was your fault. He shrugged. I was 16, already in too deep. The words hung there, unspoken weight in them both, but neither moved to touch it. Not yet. Evenings came quickly in Cedar Hollow. As the sky bruised into twilight, they'd often linger, stacking boxes, sweeping corners, fixing whatever broke that day. To anyone watching, it might have looked like two old friends rebuilding a center, but to those who remembered them back then, it was something more. A softness, a thread pulling tight between them again. The way Jack always glanced at her when she laughed. The way Maggie would pause a beat longer when he walked into a room. They spoke in glances, in silences, but still, never once, not even in passing, did they mention the prom, or the day she left, or the words she thought she'd heard. That wound stayed sealed for now, but under the quiet rhythm of boxes and blueprints, something long dormant had begun to stir. It was late afternoon when Maggie found herself alone at the clinic again. The volunteers had gone home and Jack had taken the truck to pick up more supplies. Sunlight spilled across the floor, catching dust in the air like floating memories. She was organizing intake forms when her fingers brushed a folder marked Nursing Outreach Program Archives. It was from a recent statewide campaign, but the words stopped her cold. Her breath caught, and just like that, she was 18 again, on the edge of a future she didn't yet understand. She set the folder down, sat back in her chair, and closed her eyes. That summer, everything had been changing. College brochures on the kitchen table, letters of recommendation, dreams scribbled in notebooks. Jack hadn't been much of a talker back then, but he'd always listened. When she told him about the nursing program in Hartford, he didn't flinch. He nodded, quietly supportive. Sounds like something you'd be great at, he'd said once, leaning against his truck, wiping oil off his hands. She remembered how safe that had made her feel. Not everyone in Cedar Hollow thought it made sense for a girl like Maggie to leave. But Jack never said, "Don't go." He just looked at her like she already belonged to the world. And even though part of her had been terrified to leave him behind, she'd made a decision. She'd give him the keychain at the prom, their initials the year engraved. It was her way of saying, let's try, even with the miles between us. But that night didn't go as planned. It was 1978, the night before prom. Maggie was about to leave town in a week, but she was determined to show Jack that distance wouldn't change how she felt. She wanted to assure him that her heart was his. The sun had already dipped behind the trees when Maggie walked toward the garage. The air was warm with June, and thick with the sound of cicadas. She wore a light sweater over her dress and carried a small box in her hand, the keychain inside wrapped in tissue paper. Jack was still at work, finishing a last-minute job on someone's truck. Maggie saw the lights on and smiled nervously. She stepped toward the side entrance, planning to surprise him. That's when she heard voices. Jack's voice, unmistakable, low, tired, and Tom, his best friend since middle school. You really gonna let her leave like that? Tom asked, his tone sharp. She's got her plans, Jack replied. Big city, big dreams. You could ask her to stay. There was a pause. Then Jack's voice, calm but heavy. She's just a good girl from school. That's all this ever was. She's leaving anyway. Maggie froze. The words landed like a slap. She backed away from the door before either of them saw her. Her hands trembled. The box in her fingers suddenly felt stupid. Heavy, wrong. She didn't cry until she reached home. That night, she packed the rest of her things without saying a word to her parents about what happened with Jack. She left the keychain on the hallway table. She left before sunrise. Later, Jack stood on Maggie's front porch, tie crooked, holding a corsage, waiting for her, yearning to be with her, enjoying every moment before she left for good. Her mother answered the door, warm and composed. Oh, honey, she said gently. I thought you knew. Maggie left this morning. The program started early. He didn't speak, just stood there, still as the wood beneath his feet. Her mother offered him the box Maggie had left behind. "She wanted you to have this." He took it silently. Inside was the keychain, their initials, the year. That night he went to the prom alone, sat at the edge of the dance floor, watched couples sway under fairy lights, his heart heavier than the suit on his shoulders. Maggie opened her eyes in the clinic's office. The sun had moved, her tea had gone cold. All these years, she had held that night like proof that he never really cared, that she'd been foolish to believe otherwise. She felt so sure about what happened, his rejection. But now, sitting here, remembering the way he'd looked at her back then, how gently he'd encouraged her dreams, something didn't sit right. She had left without asking, without confronting, without knowing for sure, and the truth she thought she understood suddenly felt incomplete. Jack drove the old truck down Main Street, the back filled with supply crates for the clinic. The sun filtered through the windshield, but his thoughts were somewhere else, somewhere far behind him. It had been the night before prom, 1978. Maggie was set to leave in a week. She'd been accepted into a nursing program in Hartford. Jack had been proud of her, so proud it hurt. He knew she was meant for more than Cedar Hollow. He told her that, meant it. But he hadn't told her how much the thought of losing her twisted in his chest. He remembered Tom cornering him in the garage. "You really gonna let her leave without saying anything?" Jack, tired and guarded, had muttered, "She's just a good girl from school. That's all this ever was. She's leaving anyway." He'd said it like a defense, like it didn't matter. But it had. He didn't know Maggie had been outside, didn't know those words would be the last thing she ever heard from him. He thought he'd have one more night with her, one last dance. He showed up at her house the next day to take her to prom. With a tie too tight and hope tucked into the small box in his coat pocket, he was met by her mother, all grace and gentleness. "Oh, honey," she said, "I thought you knew. Maggie left this morning. The program started early." He stood frozen. Then she handed him a small box. Inside was the keychain, their initials, the year. He recognized her handwriting on the tag. Something inside him cracked open. That night, he still went to the prom. It felt wrong not to. He leaned against the wall while couples spun beneath the gymnasium lights. He nodded when people spoke to him, but their words slid past. The music was too loud, the room too bright. He didn't know what he'd done, only that she was gone, and he couldn't stop thinking about her. Later, in the quiet of his bedroom, he sat at his desk and stared at a blank sheet of paper. He didn't write to accuse. He didn't write to demand answers. He wrote because it was the only way to keep from breaking apart. He wrote about confusion, about how her absence made the world tilt. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully, slipped it into an envelope, placed it inside a wooden box with the keychain and a few photos. One of them sitting on the school steps, grinning. Another from a picnic in the hills behind town. He never mailed it. Didn't know where to send it. Didn't know if she would care. Years later, when his mother was cleaning out the attic, she found the box and, without asking, stored it in the old oak cabinet in the back room. Said it seemed important. Said she'd keep it safe. He never thought about it again. But he never forgot Maggie. Every time he saw someone in town who reminded him of her, every time he heard her name mentioned in a grocery store line, or saw a glimpse of her smile in someone else's face, his love for her didn't stay buried. I just waited. And now he felt it stronger than ever. The next day, Maggie stayed behind to finish organizing the last shipment of storage supplies. The clinic was quiet again. It was late. Most volunteers had gone home, and only the echo of Maggie's steps filled the hallway. She moved through the back office, sorting through a stack of old file boxes, when she noticed the tall oak cabinet near the wall. It had arrived during the first week, donated by Jack like so many other things from his family's old house. She hadn't paid it much attention until now. The doors creaked as she opened them. Empty shelves, a few worn papers, one drawer stuck halfway. She gave it a tug. The drawer slid open with a reluctant groan, revealing a small, dust-covered wooden box pushed far into the back. It was plain, unmarked. Her hands hesitated, then reached. She set the box on the desk, slowly brushing off the layer of time. When she opened the lid, the world tilted. Inside was a keychain. Her keychain, the one she had left on the hall table the morning she left Cedar Hollow. Her initials, the year, 1978. Beside it, two faded photographs. One of her and Jack seated on the school steps, sunlight in their hair. Another from the science club fundraiser, her laughing in a helmet too big for her head, grease on her cheeks. And underneath those, folded carefully, a letter. Her breath caught. She sat down. Her fingers unfolded the page, soft with age. The handwriting was Jack's, strong, deliberate, familiar even now. She read the first line. I waited for you on the porch. Tie all wrong, corsage in my hand. Your mother said you were gone. Her throat tightened. I don't know why. You didn't say goodbye. I don't blame you. But I had to write this. Because if I don't say it somewhere, I think I'll go crazy. She stopped. Her hands trembled, but her eyes stayed steady. She read the letter to the end, every word, every silence between the lines. And when she was done, she took a deep breath. It felt like she was breathing again after years suffocating. She closed the letter, placed it gently back in the box, and sat there in stillness. Everything in the room felt different now, like something had been unlocked, not just in that drawer, but in her. She looked again at the keychain, ran her thumb across the initials. All these years she had believed she was walking away from someone who never cared, but Jack had been left just as confused, just as hurt, just as lost, and he had tried, in the only way he knew how, to reach her. A letter never sent, a truth never heard, until now. She stood for a long time after closing the box. The letter sat folded in her hands, its weight unfamiliar and familiar all at once. Outside, the late evening sun had faded into that soft blue between day and night. Everything felt still, like the world had paused, just for her. She tucked the letter gently back into the wooden box, but not before slipping the keychain into her coat pocket. She didn't think about what she'd say. She only knew that the silence between them had lasted long enough. She grabbed her sweater from the chair, turned off the light in the office, and stepped outside. She knew where she would find him. The town greeted her with quiet golden light and the rustle of early summer wind. Stores had closed. Porch lights blinked on. A radio played faintly from a house down the street. And she walked. Not fast. Not with anger, but with purpose. As her feet carried her toward the edge of town, every step passed places heavy with memory. The old library with the cracked front steps where they used to meet to study. She could almost hear the way Jack whispered jokes to her behind a textbook. The ice cream stand, closed now, where he once gave up his entire tip jar just to buy her a second scoop when hers dropped on the ground. The bridge by the creek, where they'd once skipped stones and talked about impossible dreams like buying a van and seeing all 48 states. She smiled, and then she laughed out loud to herself, not from bitterness, from relief, because the pain had lived in her for so long that she hadn't realized how tightly she'd been carrying it. But now, the knot had started to loosen. There was joy stirring beneath the ache, a sense that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. She touched the keychain in her pocket, her fingers curled around the initials worn into the metal. She had waited a lifetime for Jack Thompson to tell her what he felt, and all this time the truth had been sitting quietly in a drawer. By the time she reached the workshop, the last light of day had faded. The garage door was half open, the warm orange glow of a work lamp spilling into the gravel driveway. Inside, Jack was bent over a workbench, his sleeves rolled, grease on his arms, lost in the hum of quiet routine. She stood at the edge of the doorway for a moment, just watching. She didn't feel nervous, she didn't feel small. She felt like herself, finally. And then she stepped inside. Jack looked up from the workbench, startled at the sound. At first he didn't say anything, just blinked, as if not sure she was real. Maggie took a few quiet steps into the garage, lit only by the golden pool of the old work lamp and the dim blue of evening settling outside. She held the keychain in one hand, the letter in the other. Her voice came calm, clear. I found it. Jack straightened, slowly wiping his hands on a rag. Found what? She held up the envelope, edges curled with time. This, she said. Jack froze. His eyes flicked from the paper to her face, and for the first time in years, the weight of what hadn't been said filled the room like a storm ready to break. I was organizing the storage at the clinic, she said softly. There was a cabinet you donated. One of the drawers stuck. Your mother must have put it there. She paused. It was all still inside. Jack took a breath, but no words came. I read it, she added. Silence. I didn't know what happened back then, she said. I thought I did. I thought you just let me go. She paused, then added, her voice gentler now. I came to the garage that night. I had this little box with me. I had a keychain inside with our initials on it. I was going to give it to you. I wanted you to know that leaving town didn't mean leaving us. Jack's face changed. Stillness, then realization. But before I walked in, I heard you, she said. Talking to Tom. I didn't stay. I didn't ask. I just left. Because I thought you didn't want me anymore. His voice finally broke through, low and raw. I didn't know you heard. Her eyes met his. I did. Just a piece of it. Enough to leave. Jack took a step forward, then stopped. He shook his head slightly. I was stupid, he said. I was scared. I thought if I told you to stay, it'd make it harder for you to go, and you were supposed to go. You were meant for more than this place, more than me. You were everything I wanted to take with me, she said. They stood in it now, the wound, the misunderstanding, the years in between. Jack looked down at the letter in her hand. I never knew where to send it, he said. It found me anyway, she replied. He gave a small, breathless laugh. Took it long enough. She stepped closer, slowly, like she wasn't sure if the floor could hold this moment. I was angry for a long time, she admitted. But underneath that I was sad. I missed you. Every version of my life since then has had a space with your name on it. He swallowed hard. I went to the prom that night, he said, barely above a whisper. I kept thinking maybe you'd change your mind. Maybe you'd show up. I wish I had, she said. Another silence, this one not heavy, but full. She reached into her pocket and held out the keychain. It glimmered under the workshop light. I think I'm done keeping this locked away, she said. Jack looked at it, then at her. And finally, without words, he stepped forward and took it from her hand, his fingers brushing hers with that same gentle certainty he'd had when they were 17. They didn't talk much about that night in the days that followed. There was no need. Something had shifted between them. It was natural. The kind of change that doesn't need to be declared to be known. Maggie stopped walking past the garage and started walking into it. Jack started showing up at the clinic with more than just tools. Sometimes it was fresh coffee. Sometimes it was a sandwich wrapped in foil, just the way she used to like it. One afternoon, she caught him fixing a cabinet she hadn't even noticed was broken. They moved slowly, not out of caution, but out of reverence, for what they'd lost, and for what, somehow, still remained. They weren't trying to start over. They were simply picking up the thread they'd never truly let go. The morning of the health center's opening, Cedar Hollow was glowing. People gathered under a wide white tent, chatting and clapping as the final ribbon was tied around the porch rail. A large banner hung above the front door. Cedar Hollow Community Health, opening today. Maggie stood beside the entrance, clipboard in hand, but her eyes kept drifting to Jack. He stood just a few steps away, sleeves rolled, hair neatly combed. He looked comfortable and content. They greeted townsfolk together like they'd always been a pair, and in many ways they had. There were glances, smiles, a familiarity that didn't ask for attention but earned it all the same. Nearby, an older woman leaned toward her friend and whispered, just loud enough to carry, "Took them 40 years, but they found their way back." Maggie heard it. She looked at Jack. He had already turned toward her. She smiled. He smiled back. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them looked away. Some stories don't end. They wait. They lie quiet in forgotten boxes, in unsent letters, in words never said. And sometimes, when the silence finally lifts, love returns. Not as a fire, but as a hand resting gently in yours. A promise remade. A life unfinished. A beginning again.